Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay, so the bone structure in type 2 diabetes. So like I said, it has a similar bone mineral density as a regular control bone, and it may even have a 5 to 10% increase in bone density. So it may even have more bone than the controls. It does have increased cortical porosity at the microstructural level. So that can be a little confusing to think like it has increased porosity, but more bone. And so really when it's talking about the porosity, it just means that there's more really small voids in the bone, but overall there's still more bone, but it's maybe slightly more porous. And then according to finite element modeling, they found that bone strength negatively correlates with cortical porosity. So kind of the more of those porosities you have, the less strong your bones are. And then that was further confirmed with microindentation. So just like the quick summary is that there's more bone, there's more porosity, and we find that that's one of the regions that it's more fragile. Another interesting reason that causes, interesting thing that causes bones to become more fragile is they're called AGEs, and they're advanced glycation end products. These are cross-links between the collagen fibers. So collagen is very elastic, but when you have cross-links binding between them, it makes them less elastic and more brittle. And AGEs are non-enzymatic cross-links, which can be caused due to diabetes, likely due to the amount of sugar in the blood and things like that. And so, yeah, they're one of the contributors that make bone more fragile. The one thing about AGEs is it's hard to quantify because you actually need to like digest the tissue. So people are looking into non-invasive quantification techniques using serum, urine, or skin as kind of a, in place of actually quantifying the bone, but that's still a current area of research. And and yeah, you can kind of see in that figure over there, there's like a schematic of the collagen, and then all of those little bonds going between them in red and blue, those are like the cross links. So that's one effect that makes bones more fragile. Another interesting thing is the AGEs actually interfere with the cellular function. So they interfere with the osteoblast and class functions of putting down new bone and taking away old bone. And it may impair osteocyte response, but like I said, still an open area of research. So now the next section is the mechanisms of bone fragility in type 2 diabetes. And this paper talks about it in two different ways. They talk about the direct effect on the cells and then also an indirect effect on the cells. And the indirect effect is kind of the cellular environment. And the direct effect is just like it sounds, just looking directly at the cells. So first going to look at that, the direct effect on bone cells. So just going through each bone cell. So osteoblasts, their purpose is to put down new bone. And some of the impacts of type 2 diabetes on osteoblasts is the high levels of glucose suppress osteoblast differentiation. So you might have less osteoblasts with type 2 diabetes. And AGEs also increases apoptosis of osteoblasts. So even another reason why there might be less osteoblasts is because they die off more in response to these AGEs. And this is an interesting one that's also brought up later on in the presentation is decreased Wnt signaling. So this gets into an area that I'm not super familiar with, but it's kind of the cellular communications and proteins and how cells come from stem cells and become what they're going to become. So decreased Wnt signaling leads to decreased osteoblasts and increased adipocytes or fat cells. And so adipocytes and osteoblasts, they come from the same stem cell line. And this decreased Wnt signaling potentially sends some of those stem cells to become adipocytes that would have otherwise become osteoblasts. So now the osteocytes, these are the old osteoblasts that got embedded in the bone matrix and they direct the remodeling efforts. They do that through this really awesome looking network. It's called the canalicular network, and it basically looks like really dense brain tissue with lots of neurons going out. They kind of get that in that schematic there with all these branches. So they found that type 2 diabetes impairs that canalicular network, which they used for signaling and directing remodeling. And then osteocyte density is also, there's just less osteocytes in the bone, likely due to the glucose-related apoptosis. And so as a result of this, osteocytes, they are mechanosensing. So as you walk or exercise, it senses where the bone needs to be remodeled. And with all of this impaired network, it actually, it disrupts that mechanosensing of the osteocytes. Okay, so now the osteoclasts. This is kind of an interesting one. The osteoclasts, their role is to remove the old bone in the bone remodeling process, but the literature regarding osteoclasts in type 2 diabetes is controversial. So I just put a couple quotes here from the article. They say, several diabetes-derived factors have an impact on osteoclasts, yet sometimes in opposing ways. Thus, current data do not allow for forming any general statement on the role of type 2 diabetes on osteoclasts. So if you're interested in the paper, it talks about a few of the findings, but kind of the general area, at least as of 2019 when this article came out, is that there's no sort of general statement to make here for osteoclasts. Okay, so then the mechanism of type 2 diabetes, we looked at the direct effect on bone cells, and so now looking at the indirect effect on bone cells. So this is the one that I was talking about before that I said we were going to talk about again. So bone marrow, adiposity, and mesenchymal stem cell fate. So as of 2016, bone marrow fat was discovered as an endocrine organ. So that fat in the bone marrow is, plays important roles, and it can impact bone turnover. Bone marrow adiposity increases with type 2 diabetes. So you have more fat in your bone marrow with type 2 diabetes. And this increased glucose alters the Wnt signaling, which consequently reduces osteoblastgenesis and increases adipogenesis. And so, so let's see. So here's just a schematic from another paper where they're looking at mesenchymal stem cells and all of the different tissues that they differentiate into. And so you can kind of get an idea where bone and adipose both come from this shared kind of like parent in their line. But a change there could increase adipose differentiation and reduce bone differentiation. So another general effect on kind of the environment is that type 2 diabetes, the increase adiposity gives rise to low-grade inflammation throughout the body, and inflammation negatively affects whole body metabolism and bone homeostasis. Just in general, inflammation is, has detrimental effects. So now looking at the treatment of diabetic bone disease, the article talks about two main treatment methods. The first one is to control blood glucose levels and prevent those secondary effects that come from the blood glucose. And the second one is to directly block bone resorption and restoring osteocyte function. It's a little hard to see, but I have this table here. This is a table from the paper, and they have these arrows going up to say when something's increased, or down when it's decreased, or an equal sign when it's equal, or a question mark if it's inconclusive. So they have all of these things like bone formation, resorption, BMD, fracture healing for both in vivo animal studies, and then they have a similar metrics for the human in vivo studies. And so for the research that I do, I'm mostly interested in the treatments that might have to do with fracture risk. So of these treatments, these are the ones that had a decreased or same fracture risk. And so I thought it was interesting looking at all of these treatments and seeing that, of the treatments that we have, not all of them reduce fracture risk. Some of them actually saw some slight increases in human studies. I'm sure the medication has other benefits, but but just not to the bone. So I thought it was pretty interesting. The article concludes saying that, current research highlights the detrimental effect of type 2 diabetes on bone. Diabetic bone disease is accepted as a serious complication, and the mechanisms are still far from being understood. There's still a lot of current research going into this. And so more basic and clinical research are needed to figure this out. So that's kind of where the article summed up. A couple things that I thought about the article. I thought that all in all, it was really well done. It was well written and pretty easy to understand. Some of the stuff, like I said, the cellular signaling and all of that, that's just out of my wheelhouse. And so I just probably wasn't the target audience for that piece of it. One thing that I would have liked to see in this paper is they had two figures. So they had this table, and then they had this figure, which is actually a really nice figure, but it doesn't work very well for a presentation because the text is super small. But I did think it did a pretty nice job of like summing everything up. So you have the healthy bone on the one side, and then the type 2 diabetic bone. And then it kind of goes through each of those things that we've talked about. And you can see like at the top, there's the osteocyte network, and it's all nicely connected on the healthy side and kind of broken up on the diabetic side. The adipocytes, there's less on the healthy side, more on the unhealthy side. There's more osteoblasts on the healthy side, less osteoblasts on the diabetic side. So really, as I, after reading the article and kind of reviewing this figure, I thought it did a really nice job of kind of summarizing everything, but just wasn't great for the presentation today. Another thing that I would have liked to see, well, one thing that I would have liked to see from this article is maybe some figures looking at those metrics of bone, like bone mineral density, and maybe doing a review on what other people had found for bone mineral density, kind of how much good agreement there is between what other people find there. Just seeing that maybe graphically represented would have been nice. Yeah, but all in all, I found it to be a really helpful paper. And yeah, that's kind of all I have for the presentation. Yeah.
Sorry if I missed it. Did they talk about how they define fracture risk?
I don't know that they did specifically in this article. I don't know if I remember seeing that.
Well, like in your best guess, then would that just be like sort of like a threshold for like bone density or something like that?
But so like
what makes someone at risk to have a fracture, or like how do they determine who's a fracture risk or not a fracture risk?
My guess of what it would be so looking at the population that has type 2 diabetes, how many of them suffer a fracture compared to just the healthy population? And is there a significant increase in the amount of fractures in that separate population? That's my guess. And they did mention in the article that the people with type 2 diabetes are at particular risk of fracturing wrist, hip, and foot. So those are kind of the regions that are at most risk. Yeah, thanks. I don't know if that answers it. There was more of that, but okay. Yeah.
You mentioned the mechanisms are far from being understood. I'm not sure. You discussed the direct effect of the AGEs on the cells, which are resorbing and building the bones. But did I understand that the cross-linking of the AGEs itself with the collagen also seemed to make it more fragile? And if so, I was just curious how, or do they know?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So yeah, the AGs, like you said, they do directly impact the cellular functions, but then they themselves just existing as collagen, they do increase fracture risk. So the collagen is a really elastic material. It can stretch and bend and everything. But when you put those cross links between them, it limits the bending and stretching that it can do. And so it turns it from being very elastic to more brittle. And so then that effect right there can cause increased fracture risk.
Going back to the first question, I'm looking here and I can't find a citation for that 40 to 70%. Maybe I'm missing it. And if I am, somebody let me know, but I would want to know. If I was very curious about a specific statistic that an article is talking about, and they write about it and they have a citation for it, I'd go find that citation to find out how they define that, right? Because think about type 2 diabetes, other characteristics of folks who have type 2 diabetes might put them at increased risk for fracture as well, right? So I want to know, is that 40 to 70% also taking into consideration other factors, other comorbidities that happen with type 2 diabetes, such as BMI, for example.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I don't know. I think I pulled the 40 to 70% from their abstract.
Oh, you did, yeah. So the number's in here, but I don't see a citation.
No, yeah, and I was that's what I was getting to is I think I saw it in the abstract, and I don't think there's a citation for that. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Nice claim, but I'd like to know where it came from and go a little deeper, particularly since they put lead with it. I mean, that's like, if you're going to lead with a stat, you better have you know, some place to point people to verify that it's a legit stat.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What made you decide to do this particular article? I don't know if you're doing other things that are related to bone, fracture and so forth, or if this was just one you found and thought, oh, this could be cool.
So I thought since I was doing this, that I'm currently doing a study on the microstructure of bone and the effects that type 2 diabetes has on it, so I'm kind of working in some literature review into this.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
In your research, have you found an explanation as to like the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes and why? Because it says here, type 1 diabetics have, it says like a 6 to 7-fold higher risk for fractures. So I know, the two different types of diabetes obviously they're different, but they both have the similarity of chronic hyperglycemia. So what's the difference there, if you've studied that?
Yes, so that's a great question. It's not something that I've actually studied, but as far as like the difference between the fracture risk in type 1 diabetes compared to the fracture risk in type 2, I did remember seeing, I think it said that type 1 diabetes, so it does have that hallmark of low bone mineral density. So the type 1 diabetes patients, they have less, they just have less bone. You can kind of think of like osteoporosis where you have less bone. And so that reduction in bone, I think, is where that increased fracture risk comes from. I don't know for sure, like I said, it's not something I've studied, just after reading the article, that was kind of my take on it.
Anything else? Great.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Kind of a short little leash here. Okay. That's fine. So hi, my name is Matt Hughes. I'm one of the faculty here in occupational medicine. I teach the management and administration class. So most of you will come through that class at some point. I'm actually going to borrow a couple of my slides from a future presentation. So you'll see them maybe twice, 3 times if you have to repeat the class. I think I want to start off by just saying that I think we all have something in common, which is often we get these stupid little jingles in our head and you can't get rid of them. And the one we're going to talk about today is Ozempic. So, magic. The reason I wanted to present this article is because my background is mostly in management and administration. So I've been managing health and safety programs for big companies for most of my career. And often we have to make decisions that will impact a company related to whatever our expertise is or whatever the management thinks your expertise is in. And so you'll have to give your opinion on something. I wanted to talk about this particular problem in that context. So this is one of the slides that you'll see again. So America is the land of chronic disease. We've done a really good job in public health and getting rid of people dying from diarrhea, from malaria, from some of the things that less developed countries have to deal with. What we have to deal with is mostly people eat too much and all the diseases that come along with that, including cancers and so forth. But what we're going to talk a little bit about today is obesity. First, let's also borrow another slide to figure out healthcare in the US. So how, did I skip a slide? Let's see if it goes back up. Here we go. So when you think about who pays for healthcare, you need to go in, you see a provider, they decide they want to do something. You get a prescription, or maybe you get an X-ray or an MRI or something. All that stuff has to be paid by somebody, right? So there's only a couple of options in the US anyway. So one of them is that you pay for it out of your pocket. You can either pay just, cash as you go, or you could go out and buy an insurance plan somewhere, right? You can be working for or be covered under some kind of a government program. So whether it be military insurance or Social Security, or sorry, not Social Security, but Medicare or Medicaid, or some other government program, or you work for a company that provides you benefits. And primarily you can see that most people are covered under some kind of a insurance plan that's not owned, but it's operated or offered by some company as a benefit to an employee, right? So in this essence, companies are super interested in trying to keep their costs down. I don't have the 2022 data or 2023 on here, but what this shows is the average cost for a family to be insured per year. So if you look at 2021, and then these are broken down into how much the company pays for your insurance and how much you pay out of pocket. So for a family of more than 2 people, the company's paying roughly $16,000 per year for you to have insurance. And then out of pocket, you're paying around roughly, it's probably more than $6,000 at this point. So if you think about, if you have insurance plan somewhere, you're going to be paying a couple $100 every paycheck to have coverage, right? Well, you probably don't see this other cost, but the total is huge. And so when companies want to try to figure out how to save money, they want to try to reduce their, your utilization. And one of those, I guess, mechanisms to do that would be to try to get people to become healthier. Or how do you reduce personal risks that would lead to later in your life causing you to have medical problems like heart attacks or cancer, things like that. So, when we talk about those chronic conditions in the US, and obesity is one of the top risk factors for many diseases. We've done a lot of things in the corporate world. We've provided opportunities for Weight Watchers, for contests to do 10,000 steps to see, make sure you get a number of activities going in the day to try to burn calories, things like that. We've tried behavioral modification for diets. We've tried to give better choices in the cafeterias. What do you think happens most of the time that most people join one of these programs? And then you're done. It's just like a New Year's resolution. You're done by February usually. So most people fail over again and over again and over again at weight loss. I mean, I don't know if you guys all look pretty healthy, but I know I struggle. And you have to figure out, well, how can you try to figure out how to get this off? So I didn't eat any bread today, but the new idea for healthcare and for obesity is treating this more as a metabolic disease rather than as a behavioral modification. So we've gone through the whole behavioral modifications, and I think those are very important. But there's this whole new wave of drugs that are coming at us that, and Ozempic is an example of that you've seen, that they were all developed for diabetes. So it was a very good tag team today on diabetes. But one of the side effects that was discovered when these drugs were being developed and in trials was that people were losing weight. So, and the general press kind of got hold of that, and now these drugs are out there and they're being used for non-diabetic things. They're mostly being used, well, not mostly, but they're being used for weight loss. So does it really work? And we're going to try to look at that. Here are a couple of examples of weight loss drugs that you've probably seen. You've seen commercials. I know I've seen commercials for every one of these. There's this new class is called the GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide analogs. And there's 3 of them that are really popular right now. So Ozempic, Wegovy, and Manjaro. Have you guys all heard of these? All right. Good. Anyone know how much they cost to use them?
He would sell these all the time, so
Sweet. So how much?
few $1,000s.
A month?
Yeah.
So they're pretty pricey, right? If you have insurance and you are lucky enough to have diabetes type 2, then your insurance will cover that. But if you're not quite diabetic, but you want to use one of these drugs for weight loss, then you're end up going to out of pocket. So it can be pretty pricey. So before people decide to do that, you probably ought to know, does it really work or not? Just one other thing to consider when you're thinking about using medications for weight loss. This was done, it's been done for many, many years, but back in the early 1990s, when I was still training, there was a drug combination out there that was called fen-phen. Have you guys heard of that? So fen-phen became all the rage because it helped people lose, pretty good amount of weight, 10, 15 pounds that they wanted. That was very stubborn. But what happens when you give drugs after you get out of a trial, and instead of giving them to thousands and tens of thousands of people, you end up seeing the side effects that you can't see in a very small population. And so with fen-phen, what turned out was that it was causing people to develop pulmonary hypertension and heart valve problems. So the FDA pulled the drug after it was being used for about 10 years. And after all the damages have been coming in, it's roughly around 13 billion for the manufacturer. So not a good story. We've heard that of the other medications too. So I'm trying to put that in your mind is we have to be careful when we start using drugs widely to see if they're going to work, because even though there may not be that many side effects in a small study population, when you give them to a larger population, you might end up seeing those. We also witnessed this with COVID and some of the effects from vaccines and things like that. So some of the potential benefits for using Ozempic, or that's the trade name, but the generic name is semaglutide, include reducing the risk for diabetes type 2, which would also then include reducing your risk for heart disease, for stroke, for kidney problems, neuropathy, retinopathy, and I'll put a new bullet point on there for bone density problems. That's a good one. So getting back to the whole point of this is, I'm going to pretend that you're a manager. So let's say you're working for a company and you have some relationship with benefits people in some fashion. So you think this might be far-fetched. You're in industrial hygiene, you're in ergonomics, you're whatever. But once you go work for an organization and you're there for a little while, this is what you're going to learn in our management classes. You will become a manager, and managers have to make decisions. And so you'll be consulted by the benefits people to say, what do you think about this Ozempic? Is there a role for our company in managing obesity and chronic disease? So what should your answer be? I think it could be a couple of these. I'm sorry, the print's so small. You can say there's a role for incorporating these in the corporate strategy. Or you can say, well, the company should just stay out of our personal lives and don't get involved, which that's probably not going to happen because they're paying for your healthcare. So they need to know how to reduce their costs. You could say, well, the traditional wellness plans that we have, Weight Watchers and other things are sufficient. You can say you don't know anything about it, and then you probably shouldn't say that if you want to stay relevant. And then you could just tell them, remember fen-phen, and run away from it. So there's lots of things that you can say as a manager. And we're going to just walk through this article and then kind of figure out what you think. So I give you a randomized control trial from the New England Journal of Medicine, which is considered to be one of the top journals with the highest impact of people reading that and then putting whatever is in the journal into their practice. The name of the article is Once Weekly Semaglutide in Adults with Overweight or Obesity. I'm not really sure why they use the word with overweight, because that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know, technical.
Correct.
So you would think that the New England Journal would have caught that, but maybe that's portends how the other parts of the article will turn out for us. Okay. So what I wanted to do is, rather than get into the nitty gritty of and bore you to death with statistics and things like that, I want to actually have an exercise where we're going to evaluate this article on the basis of quality. And what we're going to be doing is thinking about evidence. Is there any evidence for the use of semaglutide in adults who have obesity or they're overweight with certain conditions, versus not doing that and just doing behavioral modification and increased exercise? So we're going to come back to this slide a couple of times. So as you guys probably have already heard, we do a lot of work with evidence-based medicine and evidence-based treatment guidelines here at the center. And we use something called, it's a methodology that's supported by our college, the American College of Occupational and Environmental Medicine, but it's been developed on the agree-to criteria, which is it's a body that looks at guidelines and for evidence and basically make suggestions of this is what you should look for. So the ACOM guidelines considers these 11 points as far as a randomized controlled trial goes. So you can't really apply these to non-RCTs. RCTs are the gold standard for developing evidence. So if you ever come across a randomized controlled trial and you want to know if it's a good trial or not, then I would suggest that you could use these criteria to figure that out. Okay. One of the things that's so great about this stuff is sometimes you don't even need to read the article all the way through. You can just look for these things in the article, and then you can come up with a score, and then you can decide if it's a high quality, medium quality, or a low quality study. So that's what we're going to do. I'll give you a couple of quick points about this study so you don't have to read it all. And then I'm going to assign you all each one of these points that I just showed you to try to find the answer, whether or not it's quality or not quality. Okay. So this study included 1,950 people. It was conducted in 129 sites over 16 countries, so all over the world. If you think about it, if it's all over the world, that's not a very big N to me. The N is fairly small for 16 countries, but that's just my opinion. The inclusion criteria were they needed to be 18 years or older, so you had to be an adult. You either had to have a body mass index greater than or equal to 30, or you have to be greater than or equal to 27 with some kind of a weight-related coexisting condition, which would include high blood pressure, sleep apnea, high cholesterol, that kind of thing. And then you also everybody had to try and lose weight at least once and then fail at it before you could come into the study. If you were excluded if you had diabetes, so this was not a study for diabetes, just for weight loss. And you were excluded based on hemoglobin A1C greater than 6.5, that's where the sort of diagnosis for diabetes type 2 is. The intervention was active ingredient versus placebo, plus everyone got the same other interventions. So they all got put on a diet of 500 calories less than their basic metabolic rate than they needed for the day. So some calorie restrictions, 150 minutes of physical activity per week, which, that's not that much. And then they had an individual counseling session every 4 weeks. So the study group was placebo versus a weekly injection of 2.4 milligrams of Ozempic or semaglutide. What the results showed was on the top screen here is the placebo, and down here, semaglutide. And what we're looking at is what changed from their baseline in percent of body mass lost. So what percent of your total body weight did you lose? And this over here is weeks. And they studied it for over a year. That went up to 68 weeks. And what you can see is for the bottom, the people that stayed on semaglutide and completed the study they lost about 14.9% of their body weight. So if you're thinking about someone who's 100 kilos, then you would have lost a 14, almost 15 kilos, which is a lot, 30 pounds. Versus the people that are on the placebo group, they lost a little bit, but they sort of plateaued up there, and they only lost 2.4%. So roughly around 8 pounds or something like that for most average people in the study. This is just another way to show percent weight loss. So so of all the study group, 86.4% of the semaglutide group lost at least 5% of their body weight versus only 1/3 roughly. And then you can see the differences. So when you get to the greater than 20% body weight, there's a ginormous difference between semaglutide and placebo. So those are pretty good statistics, right? So that's all you really need to know about the study. Now let's figure out if this is a very good study. So what I want to do is break up into a couple of like 2 to 3 people each. I'll start right here. And what you need to do is, so this is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I'm going to tell you which one to do. Okay, so let's see here. I think I have enough. You guys are here just since there's actually you two do number 1, you 2 do number 2. You 3 do number 3. You want to be with them? Yeah, you can be with them. 3, 4. Do you guys want to participate? Okay, so you guys do you 3, 5, you 3, 6, you 3, 7. And then Matt, and I'm not sure about your names, I'm sorry. Can you guys do number 8? You 3 do number 9. You guys want to participate? Number 10. And I'm going to skip you guys. Number 11 up here. So you 3 on the back row. Carl next to you. So all you need to do is go through this, just go through the article. Let me just get your attention one more time for just a second. So go through the article. Sorry, can I just have your attention for just one more second? So go through the article, and so if you're number 1, you're looking at randomization. So you're going to go in there and you're going to see and you're going to study the quality of randomization. Did they state it? How was it randomized, and can you prove that it was randomized? Okay. If you're looking at blinding, you just need to find that. So go through the article, and then you find the little section that talks about what it is you're looking for. And you're going to make an assessment. The assessment is either 0, they didn't do it, half, they said they did it, but they didn't really show they did it, or 1, which is they did it and it's very clear. Does that make sense? Let's take a few minutes. I'm going to go back to this slide. Here we go. Yeah. Yes, I can help you.
It was randomization, they got that, and then
You're number 2.
Yeah, it was running, and they got that. So randomization was what we're supposed to.
They got number 1, you got number 2.
Yeah, but
Like, what is treatment allocation concealed mean? Because it almost sounds like.
You're not, no, you're on this one. Oh, wait, let me do this one. Sorry, back to this one. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess we're kind of confused of what that means.
For anyone online, you guys can look at a few of those if you want on your own. Just zip through the article and look for a couple of those.
No, exactly, but it's like, the health and. Trust me.
It's basically how did they select which one you're gonna go into.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. No, but I think, but, yeah.
Give you about another minute or two. You got your answers? Okay. All right, are we about ready to give your answers? All right, so I've got my handy dandy little diagram here that I've used many times. And we're just gonna shout out a score for each of the numbers. So it's either gonna be a 0, they didn't either say how they did it or they didn't do it. A half, which is they said they did it, but they didn't really explain it. Or if they explained it fully, you understand it, and you're confident that they said they did that, then it would be a 1. So let's start with number 1, randomization. What kind of score do you want to give these guys?
Give them one.
Give them a 1, and what basis? Just
We mentioned that it's randomly assigned 2:1 ratio. Web based so that's.
okay. Okay, so kind of go along with that is number 2, which is treatment allocation is concealed, which means no one knows which group they're gonna get in ahead of time. So it's all basically up and up. You're not gonna select people to go in a different group and then be randomized. They're gonna be all doing it at the same time. So what do you think on that one?
We give it a 1.
Give it a 1. Okay. We looked at baseline comparability. You guys, what is it? Do you see anything on there that didn't look good?
We don't really talk about which countries the participants are from,
Okay.
but otherwise.
The big table that is in there shows that there are really nothing that's statistically significant. So did anything else stand out to you about study population? I didn't ask you that, but.
2 times more people in the exposed group.
Okay, so they were trying to get the side effect a little bit, maybe. What about what percent of participants were women?
The large percentage.
75%, so maybe there's something there. I'm gonna put it as 1, okay? All right, notice now that there are 3 types of blinding. We always talk about these double blinded studies. There's actually triple blinding. And so we're considering a different factor. And that's going to confuse some of you. But who did patient blinding? Were the patients blinded? It was you guys.
Give it a 1.
You give it a 1? And what did it say about blinding?
Said that,
They receive the same injections every week, and they don't know whether or not it's the real drug or a placebo.
in the same amount of dosage.
Okay. Good. What about provider being blinded? Back here?
We think it's 1 because it does say double blinded and then it says administered with pre-filled pen injectors. And so the people actually providing it couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, and I looked at the protocols too, the extra details, and says that they were visually, the placebo and the drug were visually identical as well.
Okay, very good for going to that other article and find protocol. Okay, assessor blinding.
We decided on 0 because it technically never mentions anywhere that the assessors were blinded when collecting the data from these groups after the trials. However, it is important to note that they probably didn't include it because most of the data they were collecting is difficult or impossible to bias, even if you do, as the assessor, know who got the treatment versus not. That being things like waist circumference, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, things like that. So even though they didn't mention it at all, the assessor being blinded, it probably wasn't that important.
Okay, so you could go 0 or 0.5, I think. So you can sometimes look into it, but I totally agree with you that they didn't say anything about the assessors. Okay, control for co-interventions, it's over here, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, all right.
You know what that means?
What?
You know what control for co-intervention?
Oh, yes, yeah, so we saw that the only intervention that was discussed, well, there was a semaglutide, and then there were also assigned to a reduced calorie diet. That was the only other intervention that we could find discussed in the paper, so we gave it a 1.
Okay, very good.
I actually wanted to give it a 0.75, but you didn't give us that option. So.
Okay,
We rounded up.
I think they did a pretty good job myself of, but there are many other co-interventions that they didn't talk about, like, they didn't also go to Weight Watchers, they didn't also do other things, they could have been on a really intense program, so they didn't tell people to only do these exercises, so.
Yeah.
That's probably why you wanted to.
That's why I wanted to go down to a 0.75 or something like that, because the person may choose to do other interventions, you know. That they didn't account for. And if they had asked the question, like if they had just said, hey, are you doing anything else besides what we've got here going on and captured that, then they could have controlled for that statistically.
Very good. Okay, this one's 8, number 8, so that's what, oh, yes.
Yeah, so they mentioned the compliance rate of the people who stayed on the medication was 81%. The only thing I didn't see, and maybe because I didn't read through the whole thing specifically, but they didn't establish what was an acceptable compliance before they started. But going with the sort of the 20% rule, I would give it a 1.
Okay, so that means that they never missed a dose. Compliance to me means they high compliance is they didn't ever miss doses or rarely missed a dose. Is that what you're saying?
It didn't talk about that specifically, but it did say 81% of the participants were compliant with the whole treatment program.
Okay, so you could either go a 1 or a half, right? And this is where this whole exercise goes into. There's some wiggle room here. Dropout rate.
That's us. They said they, or we gave like a 0.5 or 1. I'm super sure on how you
Okay,
do
what was
that.
the dropout rate?
It was 5.7%. But they didn't, I don't know, missed it, but didn't specifically say like how many per control group.
Okay, so if you go to, I don't know which table, but they give you this total numbers that have completed it, and it was pretty high, so I wrote down, I don't think I find it. So they had 1,312, 1,212 out of 1,306 completed. One arm in the intervention arm, and then the placebo arm, 577 out of 655. So I'd say that's pretty good. The dropout rate wasn't surprised. So I'm gonna give you one. All right, timing of assessments.
For the timing of assessments, it looked like they reported all their data on a daily journal, and they reported it weekly whenever they went into their counseling session, talking to get their injection as well as to talk about it. So we gave it a 1, thinking that it seemed like it was very regular for everybody who was involved in the test.
So people were getting assessed at the same time intervals throughout, and I think that's really the point. So I agree with you there.
The one question we had is they had that, Tyler brought this up, a 7-week break
At the end.
at the end. But we were struggling to find where they did an assessment with them. They talk about it, and it doesn't really change our answer, but it made us curious. So what did you show with that? We didn't really see that in here. So they were consistent with their assessments. But then they talked about this important part of their protocol, at least we thought. And yet, unless we missed it, we didn't see what data they got from that break.
And I appreciate that, and I think that the answer lies in, there are like four legs to this, 4 or 5 steps.
Next paper.
So yeah, there are a number coming out. Yeah, so, okay, so that's good, and then the last one, analyze by intention to treat. You guys see that? Did you find the word intention to treat?
Yes, we did.
Pretty easy to find, right?
Yep, 1.
Now, they were tricky, and then they presented the statistics in both intention to treat and non-intention to treat. Does anyone know what that means, intention to treat? So it just means that once you're randomized to a group, that even if you drop out or you have a complication or whatever, you're still analyzed in that group. So you're carried out as if you intended to finish the study, versus if you drop out and then you get out and then do the analysis, it could be a whole lot different than continuing to include the people that dropped out. All right, so if you add this up, you think this is a perfect score, 11. Oh, no, sorry, so 10. Okay, so when you start looking at this and you say, what is the strength of this article? If you're 3.5 or less, that's poor quality. 4 to 7.0 and 7.5 to 11 is high. And this is moderate. So for when we develop evidence-based guidelines, we read all the RCTs that are about a specific subject. We then grade them, and then you put them into like a spreadsheet, and you just sort of determine how many articles for the intervention are high quality, moderate quality, and poor we just ignore. And then some of them might be against the intervention, and then you try to decide what does the balance of the evidence show. That's how the ACOM guidelines have been developed. This is a really good method for looking at a randomized trial quickly. So you can skim through this once you get good at it and find all of these in about 5 to 10 minutes without even knowing what the article is about. You're just looking for these specific things to know kind of what they want you to do. And then once you get to the result, you can kind of figure that out. There's one last thing, and then we need to leave. Number 12, not on here, doesn't get a score, but number 12 is bias. And so you have to consider bias. And even though this is published in the New England Journal, which is a tremendous journal, it's a pharmaceutical sponsored study. So you have to decide, does that impact it for you? They do a pretty good job of trying to get all of the conflict of interest. If you look at it, there's like 2 pages full of people with conflict of interest, like 100 pages. So going to the final question, if you're on the benefits manager that come ask you, what is your opinion on whether or not we should use Ozempic in the workplace to help manage obesity. Knowing that it's $1,000 a person per month. But you may say that on the other end, people having fewer incidents on the insurance plan where no heart attacks, fewer heart attacks, fewer strokes, fewer other obesity related diseases. It's not an easy decision, so this was just an exercise. Someone's going to do this to you when you're prepared, I guarantee you, and you're gonna have to figure out what is the tough answer. So, my answer is I'm just gonna try it on my own first. So, any questions? Okay then, thanks very much.